In the 80s and 90s, sci-fi was a very popular genre on a par with action films. Every year there were hundreds of movies about guys who knows karate. And some fantastic thing that threatened democracy. There were many kinds of sci-fi movies, too. Hollywood studios put America into darkness several times a year, because communism with nuclear bombs was coming. This plot twist was very popular because everyone knew that communists were working all day and night in the factories making these nuclear missiles. Less dangerous than commies were the aliens from outer space who came to the United States on some important mission. More often, the goals of communists and aliens were the same, which made democracy even more worrisome. Next to aliens, in the number of films produced, was the sci-fi segment about cyborgs and robots. Sometimes these robots and cyborgs were also aliens, and sometimes even communists. Most of these films failed without a chance at the box office, but they were still being released. After all, there were uncutted gems that ripped up the box office as well as the Avengers. Today I would like to remember just one such gem that started out very well, but took a wrong turn in the sequel. This led to a box office failure and the subsequent death of the series. Like many iconic cult films, Robocop was born in agony. No one liked the script and it was constantly being rewritten. All the filmmakers pretended to be very busy and none of the directors did not want to take the project. Find famous actor in the lead role was also problematic. No one agreed walk around with a bucket on his head almost entire movie. According to rumors, producers even wanted to throw money at Arnold Schwarzenegger, but the studio itself refused this idea. It was decided that the already large Arnold would look too comical in the costume, and it would increase budget. Initially, refused to direct the film and Paul Verhoeven. Verhoeven changed his mind thanks to his wife, who was able to prove him that Robocop is not just dumb action movie, which he immediately took it for. With a few changes, it could turn into movie that Verhoeven would like. Verhoeven will say later that he not only almost abandoned the film, but he could also ruin it himself. The fact is that the movie script suggested Robocop moving like a cat. And it was such a ninja in armor. After it became clear that in a suit like this actor cannot move fast, special effects experts suggested to slow down Cyborg. Verhoeven did not like the idea right away, but it was supported by Peter Weller, who had already signed on to the film. Deciding that the actor's opinion at this point can be listened to, the director agreed with the slow policeman. It was this moment later Paul Verhoeven will often recall, agreeing that he almost ruined everything with his doubts, because the final result was magnificent. Weller, by the way, got into the movie at the very last moment. Verhoeven hoped to the last that would play Rutger Hauer. Although he and the actor conflicted on filming Flesh and Blood, the director still offered role to Hauer. For the actor, this role could have been a salvation, but whether he was too angry at the director, or did not believe in the project, but he refused. The Robocop costume cost almost $1 million. This happened because of his constant changes. Rob Bottin's special effects team had been putting the costume together for months. The funny thing is that after the costume was adjusted to Weller, it turned out that the actor cannot perform many of the planned movements. Filming was even stopped for additional training for Peter with a plastics trainer. Actress Nancy Allen, who outperformed Meryl Streep in the auditions, nearly quit on the first day of filming. Appearing on set, Allen witnessed Verhoeven filming the intentionally awful series Not My Problem, which would later be shown on television screens in a movie. Not realizing what was happening, the actress was shocked that she had signed on to a movie directed by such a talentless director. When the actress began to call her agent, recalling various bad words, she was convinced that such a powerful quality of this series is just a director's idea. Although Weller got into the film because half of Hollywood turned down the role, he could still lose it even when filming was in full swing. Since Weller wasn't supposed to be in the film right away, the costume itself wasn't tailored to him, so the actor was constantly suffering. To his requests to at least add air conditioning to the costume, the producers merely threw up their hands. When Weller's complaints have exceeded all reasonable limits, The creators tried to appeal to Lance Henriksen, who was to replace Peter Weller on the set, but Henriksen refused. After that, Weller's suit finally got an air conditioner, and the actor continued to suffer in comfort. Toward the end of filming, Rob Bottin had a confrontation with the director. They argued about the scene in which the Robocop takes off his helmet. Bottin suggested a strong darkening of the scene, so that the makeup is not noticeable. Verhoeven, on the contrary, wanted to light the scene as much as possible. He justified his demand by the ability of the film's cameraman, Joost Vacano, to work perfectly with light. Bottin, who was refused, did not speak to Verhoeven until the premiere, vowing never to work with such an untalented director again. After the premiere of the film, he immediately went to Verhoeven to apologize. Together they had worked on more films, Total Recall and Basic Instinct. Although in the 80s, censorship had not yet consumed America, what Verhoeven did, the ratings committee refused to let the theater. The film was immediately given an rating X, the same rating with which many films about plumbers and carpenters coming in the right place at the right time. Paul Verhoeven repeatedly cut excessively gory content from the film. After several rejected versions, Robocop was finally given the desired adult rating, though it would never even get that these days. Robocop hit the U.S. box office on the same day as Jaws: The Revenge, and although it was half the price of the fourth Big White Shark Adventures and had less screens, it came out a winner. Robocop's overall box office successes are rather difficult to count. The film was distributed by the Orion Studio, which was, as a small film company, sold its releases on the international scene to local distributors. In the United States, on a $13 million budget, the sci-fi action film brought in $53 million. Obviously, the studio earned a lot, as the animated series went into work immediately, and the sequel was ordered to collect as quickly as possible. It would seem that the second part can be made already bypassing many pitfalls. But the chaos of working on the sequel in its scale pushed away even the first part. Paul Verhoeven refused to work on the sequel, whom the studio had been counting on. There are usually two versions of why this happened. According to one of them, the director fled from the sequel after reading the script, which was called Robocop Corporate Wars. According to this scenario, Robocop was destroyed in the first minutes of the film and was restored only 25 years later in an even darker world. According to Verhoeven himself, the main reason for his refusal was his unwillingness to work on this particular script because it is strongly squeezed into the frame. The second version of the director refused to work on the sequel is not just the first time, forced him to do it Arnold Schwarzenegger, who came to the director with the script Total Recall. Arnold offered Verhoeven full creative freedom with one condition: the answer to the proposal he must get within 3 hours. Verhoeven met the allotted time without any problems. After Verhoeven left, the Corporate Wars script was discarded and the producers ordered a new one from Frank Miller. Director Tim Hunter, known at the time for River's Edge, starring Keanu Reeves and Crispin Glover, was pulled into the project. Hunter was excited to get to work and made a lot of changes to the new script. Here is where the problem arose. All these changes did not satisfy producers. Hunter did not want to give in and left the project. But the final film had something of him. Originally Robocane was supposed to look like an animal, but Tim Hunter insisted on a more human appearance, worried that the animal robot would look too cheap. He wanted the design of Robocane to resemble a bodybuilder in knight's armor. The director's chair was offered to Alex Cox, responsible for the drama Sid and Nancy, but after reading Frank Miller's script he declined. The director said that one of the main advantages of the first film was the irony, while Miller's script was too serious. In the end, the departing Hunter was replaced by Hollywood veteran Irvin Kershner, who directed Never Say Never Again and The Empire Strikes Back. Actress Nancy Allen was most unhappy about the turn. According to her, the reworked version of Hunter was much smarter and had a lot of humor, but Kershner came in and began to change the script and what little was left of Hunter disappeared without a trace. In 2010, in an interview, the actress confessed that she hated Kirshner and found it very difficult to work with the director. Frank Miller claims that there was nothing left of his script in the end either. He came to the set every day and after a month could not understand what kind of movie Kirshner shoots. Later, the producers said that they changed Miller's script not because there was anything wrong with it. On the contrary, everyone liked it. But at some point it became clear that it would be impossible to transfer it to the screen with their financial capabilities. In 2003, the comic book Robocop came out, which was based on Miller's original screenplay. Peter Weller didn't like what was happening with the film either. He constantly argued with the studio, trying to change certain points, but because of the lack of star status, the actor was not listening. Weller did not like the third act of the film. According to him, the film needed some moral dilemmas and it ended up slipping into a second-rate action movie. But Kirshner and the producers didn't listen to Weller's cries, deciding that a routine shootout with Kane was enough. Because of all the delays in production, the sequel reached the big screens 3 years after first part. The budget relative to the first part has increased threefold to $35 million. At the American box office, the film started from the second place, giving way to Dick Tracy. And although the sequel collected almost twice as much as the first film at the start, it managed to collect only $45 million at all. By the way, the third place in the weekly chart at the start of Robocop was taken by Paul Verhoeven's Total Recall. Only for him it was already 4 weeks at the box office, and 3 weeks later, Arnold Schwarzenegger was still in the top 10, and the second Robocop was no longer there. Although the sequel was a box office failure, Orion Studios ordered a third film. Most likely, sales on the world stage allowed the film company to go into the plus and video sales brought in some more bucks. Maybe things would have turned out differently with the third movie and the franchise wouldn't have died out for years. But the poor results at the box office of the sequel, among other things, brought Orion Studios under the monastery. The movie company in the late 80s tried to rise to a higher level, but overestimated its strength. In 1989, it became the Hollywood record holder for the number of failures. At the box office, almost all of its films failed. In 1990, trying to escape bankruptcy, the studio sold the distribution rights of its films on the international scene for $175 million. Funny enough, but it was in 1990 that the studio still had 2 big hits. Silence of the Lambs and Dances with Wolves both shot at the box office. And although both films made a good money in the United States, they collected even more money at the worldwide box office, but the studio Sony already got that money. And since a part of the budget of Dances with Wolves was covered by Kevin Costner, a third part of the film's income on American territory went into his pocket. That is, Orion with huge box office successes in reality received very modest sums, which were not able to cover a bunch of failures. It was in such an atmosphere that the third Robocop went to work. So the now traditional problems in production were elevated to an absolute. It is commonly believed that Peter Weller did not want to star in this film, but in fact this is not the case. The actor liked the idea of a new Robocop, and he even met with the director of the film, Fred Decker, where they discussed some of the details of the future movie. But at this point Weller received an offer to play the lead role in David Cronenberg's film Naked Lunch. The actor immediately jumped out of an uncomfortable costume and ran off the set. The dying studio did not want to delay the start of filming for 6 months and chose to replace Weller. The role of Alex Murphy could play the famous American ninja Michael Dudikoff. He received an offer from the studio, but because of his friendship with Peter Weller, he declined. Screenwriter Shane Black, known for Lethal Weapon and The Last Boy Scout, could have worked on the script for Robocop 3. The director was friends with the screenwriter and asked him to get the film's story in order. But at the time, Black was working on The Last Action Hero and couldn't find time for Decker, but he was completely free to appear in a small role in the film. Because of the moderate earnings of the sequel and the deplorable financial condition of the studio, the film's budget was cut to $20 million. Producers could barely afford such budget, so every dollar had to beat out. Decker said he had a good time on the set and had no regrets about signing up for the movie. He says that most of the movie's problems are the fault of the Orion studio. First of all, they insisted on a lower age rating, which turned the adult action film that the first two parts were, into a teenager movie with a PG-13 rating. This imposed a number of restrictions, and the script had to remove the violence, cynicism and irony. Secondly, it had to take some great action scenes out of the script since the studio had no money for them. Especially affected the Japanese part of the picture. There was no money for stuntmen and 2 action scenes with ninjas were not included in the film. Because of this, they had to change the storyline, and as a result, the involvement of the Japanese corporation in the picture looks pulled by the ears. When asked what he would have changed in the film if he had more money, Decker says 3 things. Hire a better Asian stunt team. Introduced more violence, more humor, and most importantly, would have changed the flight scenes to make them more exciting. Although Decker blames the studio for many of the film's problems, he does not remove guilt from himself. He was the one who pushed through some of the controversial decisions, including some that viewers later found awful. Plus, it is the director is blamed for one of the action sequences missing from the film. Decker personally inserted the robot Ed 209 into the existing script. The director wanted this robot back in the movie that he himself gave up the scene, which the producers couldn't afford because money was spent for the 209 model. When filming came to end, Orion Studios bankrupted. The deal for New Line Cinema to buy it failed. Before that, Orion could not reach an agreement with 20th Century Fox and Sony, who were also interested in buying it. So third Robocop went on the shelf because there was no money for special effects. The studio returned to the film a year after filming was finished. In 1992, just after the reorganization, $2 million were allocated for special effects and finally the premiere was scheduled. At the box office, Robocop 3 hit with practically without promotional support and with raw special effects. In American theaters, the film took $10 million. In other countries, the film was released on video almost everywhere at once. Because of the whole bankruptcy situation, the video games for the third Robocop were released a year before the movie itself. The third Robocop was very popular on consoles, and the title track from the game even earned a kind of cult status. In 1994, they tried to launch the television series Robocop, but due to low ratings and bad reviews, it was shut down after the first season. In the later years, Robocop tried to return to television a couple more times, but it quickly ended and was shelved again. In 2014, Sony Studios, which took over the rights of franchise, decided to revive Alex Murphy. The Robocop relaunch was based on a script that director Paul Verhoeven had once rejected when working on the first film. The director thought Edward Neumeyer's script was too serious, which in his opinion made it silly, so he asked for a big change to fill it with satire and humor. But in 2012, Sony Studios, having just failed with the reboot of Total Recall, decided to take it over Verhoeven's rejected script. Producers apparently thought that Verhoeven little understands in movies. He even spoke English with difficulty, and to read that clearly did not know how. Since so many Hollywood citizens felt that the initiative Sony Studio smells like napalm, from offers to join the project refused each and every one. The offers went to Russell Crowe, Rebecca Hall, Edward Norton, Sean Penn, Chris Pine, even Michael Fassbender, who was making several films a year, turned down the lead role. Some ran away because they didn't like the script, some because the offer wasn't solid enough, and some claimed they weren't mature enough to make such films. The studio saw Darren Aronofsky in the director's chair, but he didn't see himself there. In the end, Jose Padilla signed on for the film. After the great success at the global box office Brazilian action movie Elite Squad, Padilla drew the attention of American studios and he himself also burned with the desire to try his hand in Hollywood. Joel Kinnaman agreed to play Alex Murphy, as he was gaining popularity, but still little-known actor, and he needed a significant role. Problems on the set began almost immediately. The studio had planned a budget of $70 million and an adult rating, but when filming time approached, the budget grew to $100 million and the studio began to tighten the screws. The director and actors persuaded the studio to let them make a film with a hard adult rating, but they were turned down. In addition, the studio assigned people to Padilla to supervise the director in case he made any stupid moves. The director claims that he offered the studio 10 incredible ideas every day and it rejected 9 of them. What was approved? Submitted to complete sterilization. The scandal that broke out was immense. In the press went to new rumors, saying that on the set there is a complete mess. The Robocop epic ended with mediocre test screenings, because of which the film was shorter by 30 minutes. The final cut was made without a director, which hints that the rumors about the conflict on the set after all true. Once it hit theaters at the very end of January 2014, Robocop performed poorly there. On a budget of $100 million, the film take $242 million. That's not a big failure to sprinkle ashes on your head or jump out the window. But as these numbers on top of the mediocre reviews from critics and audiences, the studio threw all plans for a sequel into a far dark corner. The plans, by the way, were grandiose. The studio was going to take over the first version of the War of the Corporation script, which in '90 could not become a sequel, because of its high cost. In fact, the new Robocop is not as bad a film as it may seem. It is rather ordinary or, as they say in such situations, sterile. The film lacks some kind of twist that might make it stand out. Who is primarily to blame for this? Studio control, the director's inexperience, or the parade of planets? We will no longer know. By the way, Paul Verhoeven believes that the main problem with the remake is the excessive seriousness. According to the director, the humor could have raised the film a notch higher and made it not so average. Now there is talk of a TV series, which will be a prequel to the first part. Of course, Robocop himself won't be in it, and then what's the point of that is a rhetorical question. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, stay tuned.